So we have discussed asset only approaches, we have discussed liability relative approaches, and now we are moving on to discussing goal based asset allocation approach. So what is goal based? It is the one in which you will be doing asset allocation based on the individual goals. Both institutions and individuals can have both. Institutions generally have a single goal for one portfolio, while individuals can have multiple goals. Goals can be related to time horizon, risk measure, return determination, risk determination, and tax status. Three major implications for an investment process that attempts to address the goals characteristics are that overall portfolio needs to be divided into sub portfolio. So let's say if an individual have three goals, goal A, B, C, then you may need three sub portfolios for meeting those goals. That is one portfolio for each goal, and then you will need to combine these sub portfolios into one big overall portfolio, which adds to the complexity. Both taxable and tax exempt investments are important. Probability and horizon adjusted expectations, such as minimum expectations, replace the typical use of mathematically expected average return in determining the appropriate funding cost for the goal or discount rate for future cash flow. So you may have certain minimum expectations in that case, and so when designing your portfolio or doing your portfolio allocation or coming up with expected return, you would have to incorporate those minimum expectations that have to be met. This is just the representation of overall goal-based asset allocation process that you can go through. I don't think you need to memorize. This is just to give you an overview. Key point to note is that there are two major parts in goal-based asset allocation. A is creating the portfolio modules, and B is identifying client goals and matching each of those goals to appropriate sub-portfolio. What does it mean? That is first coming up with different portfolios, for example A, B, C, D. Now analyzing the goal and now selecting which of these modules would meet that goal, A, B, C or whatever, and then making up different sub portfolios for each of the separate goals and then coming up with the overall portfolio. So when we talk about client goals, how do you define client goals? There can be two types of client goals. One are those goals that client or investors seek to achieve, that they want to have. For example, wants, needs, wishes, dreams, and understanding the need for urgency. Others are those that clients want to avoid. So for example, nightmares, fears, worries, and concerns. So this is how you describe client goals, and this is just an example of on describing client goal, whether a goal is desire or whatsoever. So this is basic example. For example, a client describes a desire to have a reserve of 2 million euros for business opportunities that may develop when he retires in 5 years. What are the important features of this goal? Important features are that it is a desire. Another important feature is that time horizon is 5 years for this desire. So this will have, in this case, investor will have a higher risk tolerance compared to a need. In need, risk tolerance is lower. So in this case, he would be willing to take a higher risk or will be able to provide more chances of error. And the time horizon is approximately 5 years. The time horizon is 5 years. Words such as desire compared with expressions such as need indicate that there is room for error. In the event that the capital markets are not supportive, the portfolio acquired to meet goal described as a desired will likely to involve a riskier profile, One would want to verify this assumption by comparing size of gold compared with the total financial assets available. Another thing that you need to check is that you need to compare this 2 million with the overall size of portfolio. A 70-year-old client discussed the need to be able to maintain 70-year-old to be able to maintain her lifestyle for the balance of her life and wishes to leave $3 million to be split among her three grandchildren at her death. What are the important features? So first is maintaining the lifestyle. This is a need. In this case, he will have low risk tolerance and time horizon will be from 70 years till death. So for example, if average age is 90 years, then time horizon will be approximately 20 years, all long term. On the other hand, she has she wishes to leave $3 million. This is a wish. In this case, she will be willing to take a higher risk. Any confusion so far? So this is how we describe the client goals or analyze the client goal. That what is the kind of risk tolerance that it have, what is the return requirement, what is the time horizon or any other special constraint. Moving on to constructing the sub portfolio. So once you have analyzed the or described the goals, then next step is that you construct the portfolio. How do you construct the portfolio? You identify the amount of money that needs to be allocated to each goal. You identify asset allocation module with highest possible return given risk tolerance. For example, if she have high risk tolerance for a specific goal, then which portfolio, which sub portfolio or which module provides highest return for that specific risk tolerance. The risk tolerance is characterized by given required probability of success over a given time horizon. If required probability of success is higher, then that means risk tolerance is lower. If time horizon is higher, that means risk tolerance is higher. Any confusion so far? So this takes us to the example. There is a family of Smiths. They have financial assets of $25 million. Age of parents is mid-50s. Household spend is 0.5 million a year. Inflation is 2% per year. And they have 4 goals. Now first thing is that you need to define these goals. So first goal is need a 95% chance of being able to maintain their current expenditure over the next 5 years. So what are the characteristics of this goal? It is a need. Why? Because they have very low risk tolerance. They need to ensure that there is 95% chance of meeting this. So it is a need. Time horizon is 5 years. Probability of success is 95. Second goal, want 85% chance of being able to maintain current expenditure over the 25 years. So it has 85% chance. Seem to be somewhat higher risk tolerance than need. So and it is a want. So it is a want. 25 years time horizon, 85% probability of success. Next one again a need, 90% chance to transfer $10 million to children in 10-year time horizon. Fourth is wish to have a 75%. So it is a wish. Time horizon 20 years and probability of success is 75%. Any confusion? This is the first step, that you need to define the goals in financial terms. And next step is selecting the respective modules. So here you have modules A, B, C, D, E and F. You need to select that which module suits which goal. So in first goal, you need, this is a need, and you have 5-year time horizon and you have 95% probability of success. So that means you need to select probability of success as 95%. So you need to look into these. And you need to look at the 5-year time horizon. That means you will only look at this part. and you will ignore 10, 20 and 25, right? So you only need to look into this box. Within this box, for 95% required success, which portfolio is providing the highest return? This one, 2.3, that is it. So that means A should be selected to meet the first goal. Any confusion so far? And what is the required return on A, expected return on A? It is 2.3%. And they told you that their household spend is 500,000 per year. And this first goal is related to household spend. That means they need at least 500,000 per year for the inflation of 2%. That means every year they need at least 500,000 plus 2% of inflation. So that means this 500,000 plus 2% of inflation, this should be equal to the return from this module, right? And what is the return from this module? 2.3%. And what is the requirement? Have they given you the requirement? So if you calculate 500,000 plus inflation, it will give you a present value of 2.43%. That is, if you need 500,000 every year in future for 5 years and you want that to be increasing at 2%, its present value will come out to be 2.43%. So this is your present value. So that means you need to invest at least 2.43% in module A. Or simply speaking, if you do 500 into 1.02 divided by 0.023 minus 0.02, what is the answer? Calculate it. 170,000. Not possible. This is 500,000, so it has to be. This is not 0. This is 0.023 and this is 0.02. 170,000. Oh, and you get me calculated. It is 170,000 thousand. That is one. So we took 500,000 as 500. So it is 170,000 thousand. In this question, then your required rate of return would be different. It wouldn't be, I think, 2.3%. It would be different. So can you see it curriculum? What is the required rate of return for the question? Oh, sorry. So the mistake that we did was we did not look at this 5-year horizon. So we will only discount it back for 5 years and not for the life. So we use Gordon growth model, which is for the terminal value. that is for the whole life. So for 5 years you will need a schedule that in first year it will be, for example, 500 into 1.02 and then 500 into 1 point, then this multiplied by this and then so on, and then when we calculate present value we will come out to be, it will come out to be 2.43 million. That means we need to invest 2.43 million in this module A, and that is 9.7% of the total wealth. Total wealth is 25 million. So 2.7 divided by 25 million would be 9.7. 2.4 divided by 25 million would be 9.7%. Now moving on to second goal. Second goal is a bond, 25-year horizon. So as 25-year horizon, we will only look at the this table, that is for 25 years. 85% probability of success, we will only look at this line. In this line, highest return is provided by F, that is 6.1%. So that means we will invest in this F module for 25-year time horizon at 6.1%. And when we calculate the present value, then it will come out to be 4.978 million. And this comes out to be 19.9% of total wealth. And when do we need this for 25 years? We need it for 25 years after 5 years. That is after our retirement. So if you look into it, if you look into the question, it will tell you that this is needed for 25 years after 5 years. So when you calculate the present value, it will come out to be 4.978, or it will be a next goal after achieving the first goal, that is after the 5-year time horizon. Then comes third goal. Third goal tells you that it is a need, 10-year horizon. So as it is a 10-year horizon, we will look into 10-year table. And in this one, it tells us that the probability of success is 90%. So we select this line. In this line, the highest return is provided by C, that is 4.1%. So at 4.1%, the present value will come out to be 6.671 million. That is, we need 6.671 million for meeting this goal. Then going on to fourth goal, 20-year horizon. So I will look into 20-year table. And 75% probability of success, so I will look into 75%. And the highest return for 75% probability in 20-year horizon is 6.8%. That means I will select F, and I will require a capital of 2.426 million for investment into F. So first step was defining the goals. Second step was selecting the appropriate portfolios for those goals. And now third step is that you combine all of these and you decide that how much should be invested in which portfolio. So in first portfolio, you invest for 5 years at a rate of 2.3%. In second portfolio, you invest for 25 years for a rate of 6.5, and so on for third and fourth. And these will help you meet your desired 4 goals. So for each goal, you have a separate portfolio. Now you also know that how much is being invested into these, right? So you know that how much is invested into this, how much is invested into this. You know 9.7% goes to A, 19.9 goes to F, 26.7 goes to D, 9.7 to F, and 34 to C. So now you know the allocation as well. So this is your overall portfolio allocation that is dependent on sub portfolios. And your required capital in currency is 25,000. So this is your total capital, and this is how you will allocate it. Any confusion so far? So now you know that this is how you will allocate it to different asset classes. But these portfolios in themselves have different sub asset classes. So investing 9.7% in it would mean that you are investing some portion in equity, some portion is fixed income, some portion in some other asset class within it. So how do you come up with overall portfolio? So you know the portfolios, or you know the asset classes for each of the portfolios A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now if you are investing, let's say 9.7% in A, that means you are investing 2430 in A. So if you are investing 2430 in A, you can calculate that how much will you invest in cash, how much will you invest in global investment grade, and how much will you invest in other portfolio. Similarly, you can calculate how much will you invest in these portfolios here, how much here, how much here, how much here. And then when you sum them up, you will get to know, or when you calculate the average, you will get to know that from 25,000, 9% is going into cash, 24% is going into global investment grade, 12% into global high yield bond, and this is your overall portfolio. So in your overall portfolio, this is how you will divide the overall portfolio between different sub asset classes. This is how you form overall portfolio in goal based asset allocation approach. Any confusion? Moving on, revisiting the module process in detail. First, the capital market assumptions are formed. Then a historical correlation matrix is made to analyze pairwise correlation of asset classes. Then you use mean variance process with constraints to reflect market portfolio considerations and reasonable asset class or strategy suitability given the goals. Then three major elements in constraints are liquidity, strategies with normal return distribution, and measure of drawdown controls. The modules created generally satisfy two major goals. They cover wide spectrum of investment universe, ranging from all cash portfolio to all equity alternative. They are sufficiently differentiated to avoid creating distinctions without real differences. So these are the two main purposes that are satisfied by modules. So if you look into modules, they will provide you an option with cash only approach, that is more focused on cash or risk free assets. It can all they will also you will also found a module providing you a risky approach in which most of the allocation would be in risky securities. Secondly, they cover a large investment universe, so that providing you a large number of alternatives, and they are sufficiently differentiated. You will be able to differentiate A from F and F from D and D from F or C. Any confusion so far? So if you look into it, all of these are differentiated. All of these have different allocations. Moving on, periodically revisiting the overall asset allocation. So goal-based allocation must be regularly reviewed, and there are two considerations that dominate it. Generally, time horizon should reduce as you spend one more year. So let's say your time horizon is 5 years and you are currently at year 0. As you spend 1 year, your time horizon will become 4 years. So that means your goal has now changed to 4 years. So that means your portfolio needs to be, or asset allocation needs to be revisited. Why? Because your time horizon has changed. The preference for upward rather than downward volatility, combined with perceptions that goals may have a higher required probabilities of success than truly the case, leads to the portfolios that typically outperform the discount rate used to compute the required initial capital. So eventually what they are saying is that your portfolios may outperform the discount rate used to compute the required initial capital. And if they are outperforming the required initial capital, that means again that you need to revisit your asset allocation. Why? Because their returns have not been up to the expectation. If they have been more, then their weightage will become higher. If the return have been lesser, then their weightage will become lower. This is a goal-based wealth management advisory overview. So first, firm-wide process. First, you take capital market expectation and you analyze client goals and you define client goals. Then you analyze asset strategy constraint. Then combining these three, you come up with goal-based modules, like those modules A, B, C, D, E, and F. Then You look at the specific goals and you assess and assets needed for each goal, that how do you need to meet those goals. Let's say there are goals X, Y and Z, and then you decide that which module should be used to meet those goals. And by doing this analysis, you arrive at a specific client allocation, that how much should be invested in goal A, in module A, how much should be invested in module B, how much should be invested in module C. Then you use this specific client allocation and you take tactical view of opportunities and you combine it with portfolio tilting model to come up with a specific client tilted portfolio, that how much will be invested in equity, how much will be invested in fixed income, and so on. So this is the overall process. First, coming up with goal based module is a firm wide process. Coming up with a specific client allocation is a client process, and then coming up with a specific client tilted portfolio is again firm wide process. So we discussed asset allocation for asset only approaches. Then we discussed asset allocation under liability relative approach. Then we discussed asset allocation under asset liability, sorry, in goal based approach. Now we are moving on to other parts. Other approaches can include heuristics and other approaches. What is heuristics? A heuristic is a rule that provides a reasonable but not necessarily optimal solution. That is not arriving at optimal solution, but using a simple rule to arrive at a reasonable solution. That is reasonable, not optimal necessarily, but reasonable. Like for example, one of the heuristics is 120 minus your age. That says that your percentage allocation to equity stocks should be equal to 120 minus age. So if you are 70 years old, then allocation to stocks should be 50%. There is another heuristic, that is 100 minus age. That is, if for example you are 60 years, your allocation to stocks should be 40%. And then when you become 70 years, your allocation to stock should be 30%. So both of these, allocation of stock continues to decline as you reach the reach the maturity of your age, or continues to decline with age. And investment in fixed income continues to increase with age. And what is the rationale? The rationale is that if you consider human capital, then most of your human capital is fixed income like. For example, 70% is fixed income like. So if you are investing today at a young age, so at a young age, your human capital is very significant. And if human capital is significant, that means your exposure to fixed income is very significant. That means in order to diversify, you will need significant exposure to equity. But as your age increases, your human capital declines. That means your exposure to fixed income is declining. So you need to increase exposure to fixed income. This is the rationale. Another heuristic is 640, 60-40. That is 60% equities and 40% fixed income. This is assumed to be a reasonable asset allocation. Another allocation is, or heuristic is, endowment model. Endowment model is also called Yale model. It says that you should combine non-traditional investments with active management and seek to earn illiquidity premium. So non-traditional investments are alternative investments, and alternative investments are illiquid. So this approach says that you should actively manage your illiquid investment or non-traditional investment to earn illiquidity premium. So in this case, in this model, large allocation is made to non-traditional investment, including equity oriented investment driven by investment manager skill, for example private equities, and the purpose is to earn illiquidity premium. Moving on, another approach is risk parity, and this is the approach related to risk budgeting. So remember risk budgeting, we said that risk budgeting is a process in which you allocate risk to different sources of risk. That is, for example, how much risk will come from equity, how much will come from fixed income, how much will come from commodity, for example. Risk parity is a concept that says that risk should be equally divided among all the asset classes. That each asset class or risk factor should contribute equally to the total risk of the portfolio. And if this happens, portfolio will be well diversified. This is the assumption of risk parity, or this concept or theory is known as risk parity. And here is a formula to it, that is weight of asset multiplied by covariance of asset with the portfolio equals 1 upon n into variance of portfolio. That is, if you divide variance of portfolio, total portfolio, by n, that is by the number of stocks, then it approximately equals weight of that asset multiplied by covariance of that asset with the portfolio. So that's why it says that you should take an average variance, and that average should be allocated to all the asset classes. What are the primary criticism? It ignores the expected return, only taking the volatility and dividing it, not considering the return that you are making based on that volatility. The contribution to risk is highly dependent on the formation of the opportunity set. That is, which asset classes have you included or excluded, how much weight have you given to those asset classes, and that is not captured here. After driving a risk parity based asset allocation, the next step in the process is to borrow or lend so that overall portfolio correspond to investors' risk appetite. So if the portfolio that you have come up with, if that portfolio is not as per investors' risk appetite, how will you make adjustment? You will either borrow, that is go on to a leverage position, or lend, that is keep some of your wealth as cash or equivalents, to arrive at the investor optimal portfolio, or to arrive at a portfolio that suits the investor's risk appetite. This is risk parity approach for asset allocation. That is, first you divide risk equally among all asset classes. Based on that risk, you compute expected return. If that expected return with respect to risk is not as per investors' risk appetite, then you can increase or decrease risk appetite by then you can increase or decrease risk in this allocation by taking leverage or by putting some in cash. If you want to increase risk, you will take leverage. If you want to reduce risk, you will put some of your funds into cash. Moving on, the 1 upon n rule. The 1 upon n rule simply says that equal allocation should be done to all the assets. That is, for example, if I have 10 asset classes and if I have $100 million to invest, I should allocate $10 million to all the asset class. Each asset class should receive $10 million. So 1 upon n. 1 upon n rule may sidestep problems caused by optimizing when there is estimation error in inputs. Any confusion so far? Okay, so that was about asset allocation. Once you have done asset allocation, then you will need to do rebalancing to ensure that you do not deviate from asset allocation. So for example, taking a simple example, let's say your strategic asset allocation is 70% equity and 30% fixed income. As you move ahead, equity outperforms fixed income. When equity outperforms fixed income, that means equity goes up at a higher rate compared to fixed income. So that means in total portfolio, equity becomes a higher percentage compared to fixed income. This means that a rebalancing is required to come again to the strategic asset allocation. So why is this rebalancing important or required? To ensure that you are on a strategic asset allocation. Why? Because you think this is the best asset allocation. But then again, when you do rebalancing, you will have to incur transaction cost or liquidity cost, and so those costs can dilute your return. So when doing rebalancing or when deciding the frequency of rebalancing, you should do a cost benefit analysis, that what are the costs and what are the benefit, and you should do rebalancing on such a frequency at which cost benefit analysis is the most provides you the most optimum results or most optimal results. Disciplined rebalancing is the one that reduce risk and incrementally add to returns, and at the same time control your cost as well. Key findings related to benefits are rebalancing earns a diversification return. So if your portfolio have become less diversified, then rebalancing it again would again increase the diversification benefits, correct? But then again, this will only be true if transaction costs are low. If transaction costs are higher, then diversification benefits may reduce. Rebalancing earns a return from being short volatility. What does it mean? This means that portfolio of risk and risk-free assets is like buying and holding position plus selling out of the money puts and calls on risky assets plus investment in premium investment of premium in risk-free bond. What does it mean? If you have risky asset plus risk-free asset, if this is a portfolio, then this is the same as buying or keeping a risky asset portfolio. This will replicate risky asset, but now you also need risk-free asset, but you do not have money for risk-free asset. So how will you generate money for risk-free asset? You will sell out of money puts and calls on risky asset, and when you sell puts and calls, this will give you premium, right, or some money, and then you invest this money or this premium into risk-free bonds to have the characteristics of risk-free asset. And this position is known as short volatility. Why short volatility? Because you have a short position in options, and options have a direct relationship with volatility. So if volatility goes up, value of options will go up, and if value of option goes up, value of your position will go down. That means value of your position is moving in inverse direction compared to volatility. And sorry, because if volatility is going up, value of your options is going up, and you have a short position in options. So if you have a sell position in options, that means that if your value of options is going up, value of your position is going down because you have sold option, and that means value of your position have inverse relationship with volatility. So that means you are, in other words, short volatility exposure. You have a short volatility exposure. If volatility goes up, your return goes down. If volatility goes down, your return goes up. So this is what this concept is about. Now moving on, rebalancing can be in a specific actual terms or can be in percentage range term. So for example, I can tell you that you need to keep rebalancing at 70% equity and 30% fixed income, or I can tell you that your equity should remain within a range of, let's say, 60% to 80%. That is provide you a corridor. So if I am providing you a corridor, why would a corridor be used? Corridor is used to reduce transaction costs. That is to reduce the need for rebalancing, because if there is very frequent rebalancing, that will incur costs. But how do you decide the width of corridor? So width of corridor is dependent on different factors, like for example transaction costs. If transaction costs are lower, you will keep a higher, you will be able to keep a narrower width, right? Why? Because you will be able to rebalance more often. If it is not costly, you can rebalance more often, so you can keep a narrower width. Risk tolerance. If risk tolerance is higher, you can keep a wider corridor width. Correlation with the rest of the portfolio. If correlation is higher, you can keep a wider width. So these are factors that are directly related to width. If one of them increases, you can have higher width. Then there are also factors that are inversely related. For example, volatility. If volatility is higher, that is a that means your asset will be moving quite a lot. So in that case, you should have higher corridor generally. But you are still not keeping a higher corridor, but instead narrower corridor. Why? Because increase in volatility means higher risk. And if there is higher risk, then you need to rebalance more often. So your corridor should be narrower. So higher volatility, narrower corridor. So that was about corridor. Once we have decided the corridor, so let's say my corridor is 60% to 80%. Now, if let's say my allocation goes out of the corridor, let's say it goes to 55%. I need to rebalance it and my target is 70%. Now, when I rebalance it, should I rebalance it to 60% or should I rebalance it to 70%? That is the question. So, how do you decide that? Generally, it is better to rebalance to target. Generally. So, generally, it is better to rebalance to target. However, rebalancing to target can be costly. Why? Because then more transactions need to be made. So in order to save those costs, you can rebalance it to the nearest boundary. Then again, you will need to do cost benefit analysis. So in general, if fixed transaction costs favor rebalancing, if there are fixed transaction costs, then you should rebalance to target base. Why? Because your transaction cost is fixed. No matter if you rebalance it to target rate or you rebalance it to corridor, then you should eventually rebalance to target rate. However, if there are variable transaction costs, then it is better to rebalance to nearest corridor border instead of rebalancing to target rate. Why? Because rebalancing to target rate would incur more cost. So generally this is the assumption that we take, but then again based on the scenario you will have to do cost benefit analysis and decide which one is better. Any confusion so far? So this brings us to the end of this reading, and here are some conclusions to the reading. This is just the summary of reading. So it tells you about MVO. Then we discuss criticisms of MVO that you already know. Then we discuss how do we address concerns for MVO. That is, we use reverse optimization, we use black determinant for writing diversification. We place constraints or we use resampling inputs or resampled efficient frontier by to prevent extremely concentrated portfolios. We find appropriate proxies for illiquid assets to deal with the illiquidity problem. Then we discuss risk budgeting, that it is a means of making optimal use of risk in pursuit of return. Then we discuss characteristics of liabilities that affect asset allocation in liability relative asset allocation. Then we moved on to discussing approaches of liability relative asset allocation. In approaches, we discuss surplus optimization, we discuss hedging and return seeking portfolio approach, and we discuss integrated asset liability approach. And we discuss that integrated asset liability approach is useful in scenarios or with the financial institutions who can control their liabilities. And the examples include banks and insurance companies, etc. Then we moved on to goal-based asset allocation. And in goal-based asset allocation, we discussed that there are sub-portfolios and each sub-portfolio is linked to a goal, and based on that we make overall portfolio. And we discussed that there are two fundamental parts in asset allocation under goal-based asset allocation, that is creation of modules and then identification of client goals and matching of those goals to the modules or to appropriate sub portfolios. Then we discussed some other approaches to asset allocation that included heuristics and other approaches. That is 120 minus age, 100 minus age, 60-40 stock bond, endowment model. Endowment model was including non-traditional investments and actively managing them to earn illiquidity premium. Then we discuss risk parity, in which risk is divided among sources or different sources equally. Then we discuss 1 upon n rule, in which we divide just the do allocation based on 1 divided by number of assets. Then we talked about rebalancing. In rebalancing, we talked about rebalancing is required. Why required? To ensure that you are operating at a static asset allocation. But then again, it can have costs. So that means you need to do cost benefit analysis. And what are the benefits of rebalancing? Among the benefits, one of the key benefits is diversification return. And how does it get you diversification return? From being short volatility and supplying liquidity to the market. That is, if volatility in your asset allocation is lower, you will remain be diversified, and if you remain diversified, you will earn extra return, and by supplying liquidity to the market. Moving on, factors that positively impact optimal corridor are transaction cost, higher transaction cost, more wider corridor, higher risk tolerance, wider corridor, higher correlation with rest of portfolio, wider corridor. And then there are factors that have inverse relationship. For example, volatility. So volatility generally have inverse relationship, but then again you need to do cost benefit analysis. If costs are exceeding the benefits, then you may need to take a wider corridor. Generally, if volatility is higher, that means risk is higher, and if risk is higher, you take a narrower corridor. But if keeping narrower corridor have significantly high cost, in that case you may want to keep a wider corridor despite volatility. Then we also discussed that if there are fixed transaction costs, then you generally rebalance to target. If there are variable transaction costs, then you generally rebalance to nearest border of the corridor range. So this is the summary of overall topic, and this brings us to the end of the reading. So let's